Let's start by taking a broader look at them first. All Aedra, or Great Spirits, come from Anu and Padme. These two embodiments of quintessential values are said to have created Ner, the Grey Maybe, through their influences colliding. As they represented fixed principles of the ineffable light and the abominable dark, eternal stasis and constant chaos, Ner was the middle ground. It was where light could be dimmed, shadows banished, and events could happen, but didn't have to. To the two primordial beings, Ner was something new, something they have never witnessed before, for all they have known were each other. Ner was intriguing and exotic, alien but simultaneously familiar. Unlike the glaring contrast of the other one, Ner was amicable to both of them. Curiosity turned to interest, interest into passion, and passion into fear. The two wanted Ner for themselves, to be exclusive of the other, and so Ner had to choose. And she chose Anu, which caused Padme to depart filled with bitterness and rage. In time, his wrath swelled and spilled, and he returned, seeking to possess what he desired with power. But Anu would not lose Ner so easily, and he faced his brother in combat. As they struggled and nullified each other, Ner was mortally wounded. Before her demise, she brought the world into existence, Mundus. Two brothers, however, were locked in eternal conflict, sparred forever. Somewhere along this tale, Anu has created his own soul, Anuel, his derivative, a reflection of himself. In response, Padme has done the same and spawned Sithis. But as history likes to repeat itself, so was it this time. Brought forward Auriel in similar fashion as did his precursor, while Sithis begetted Lorkhan. Auriel was the first of Aedra, and with his will time organized itself. Events started occurring, and with time passing, more concepts and limitations congealed and gained sentience. At this point, there is no Aedra or Daedra, only Great Spirits. So all of them exist in the location they are in, mingling and interacting. One wonders, how did they converse when they were all equal? Of course, their progenitors, Anu and Padme, are not subject to time and are not bound by space. As Lorkhan wandered aimlessly throughout the existence, he reached the edge of it, and with nowhere else to go, he looked back. And what he saw were the remains of Ner, or Mundus, like a disc hurling through space, round and rotating. But he witnessed it from his side, and only saw the straight line, like the letter I. This moment was when the seed of revelation was sown within Lorkhan. He began thinking about his being, his existence, his life. Then an idea sprouted in his mind, which bloomed into the concept of a place where lesser beings could experience existing, they could learn, better themselves, and maybe even join the Great Spirits one day. This gave Lorkhan purpose, something he so far lacked and perhaps desperately needed. Seeing the secret tower made him aware of the potential, of the possibilities he has. And he was not intending to be idle. Excited, he shared his thoughts with the other spirits, and some eagerly agreed to help him. Others renounced his idea and wanted nothing to do with the concept of a world. Some spirits took some convincing, and so did Auriel, as at first he was against this undertaking, but when he was promised to be the king of the new realm, he agreed. A spirit called Kinnereth was the first to join Lorkhan, and she created the space for their project, while Magnus designed plans for the new place. With everything prepared and resources at the ready, they began creating. Amassing their power, they stretched the space, creating a bubble of reality in which the world would be made. But as the bubble grew, it encompassed the Aedra and trapped them within itself. Suddenly caged, they tried to break free, but in vain. Their strength, essence, and divinity was siphoned into the world. Only Magnus, horrified by his siblings diminishing before his very own eyes, managed to flee. Other spirits, seeing their kin thrashing and withering, scatter. Confined and diminishing, Auriel and other spirits could not undo the events that were put into motion. They begged Anuel to take him back, but he couldn't, as he already filled their places with other things. Eventually, the new world stabilized, and it was revealed that many spirits didn't survive the process. Some were entirely consumed by the reaction and became part of the world, such as wind, water, or earth. Some had their power drained to such extremity that they became no more than mere mortals, precursors to men and elves. And the most powerful 8 lingered, mortal but not yet absorbed. However, they gave so much of themselves, or rather, so much was taken from them, that they also became part of the world. They cannot exit this realm, just as they cannot be banished from it, and as long as they exist, so will the world, and as long as Mundus exists, so will they forever be trapped within its bounds. This is why the 8 are so weak and so powerful. None of them can rival Daedric princes, but Mundus is their realm. It is place where they rule supreme. They view the world with disdain and dismay. Even if they can interfere, they rarely do, unless the situation is truly dire. The Aedra bestow their blessings quite freely, but as their boons are plentiful, so they are negligible in scope. By contrast, the gifts Daedra grant are a lot more powerful and can change the course of history. But at the same time, their artifacts are unique and in limited numbers, and so mortals must prove their worth first, through a rigorous task or a challenge. It is also worth mentioning why the Daedra meddle so much in the mortals' realm. Since they did not participate in the making of Mundus, Nirn is completely alien to them, mysterious and elusive. Just as Anu and Padumai were fascinated by Nir, so the Daedra are captivated by Nirn. The unknown realm attracts their attention like flame attracts moth, and while they can't comprehend the mechanism of it, the rules of nature, they do find one thing infinitely more alluring: free choice and will of mortals. Legends say that after the convention, the Aedra have left to Aetherius. Despite being in a different plane of existence, they are anchored in Mundus, unable to detach themselves. These connection points are the planets that orbit Nirn. However, plane is a more fitting term for them. They are round, true, but rather two-dimensional. These are portals to the Aedra's realm, one for each of them, always open. Aetherius, just like Oblivion, contains many realms within. All the afterlife realms are in Aetherius, Sovngarde, Lesware, or Far Shores. According to Vivek, Dwemer recognized 8 worlds of existence: Nirn, which is of course our home; Lkhan, which refers to Lorkhan; Rkhet, Thender, which would be Stendar; Kinnert, which would be Kinnereth; Akhat, Akatosh; Mhara, Mara; Junal, Julianos. It is worth noticing that the spelling of Akhat clearly refers to Akatosh rather than Auriel. In similar fashion, Junal is a Nordic deity not found in elven pantheons. Curious thing is the inclusion of Lkhan, or Lorkhan, on this list, as he has not a realm of his own, nor has he a planet that orbits Nirn. If anything, Mundus could be in a way considered Lorkhan's realm, but then why include Nirn separately? Lastly, Rkhet. This world is not so obvious to translate. From men's pantheon, the obvious contenders are Arkay, Dibella, and Zenithar. From elven side of faith, Magnus, Xaxis, Jeffre, Trinamag. But let's cross-reference these with the actual Dwemer orreries, which include Zenithar, Dibella, and Arkay. In relation to Rkhet, I believe we can discount Dibella and Zenithar, as they have no presence in both religions. This leaves Arkay and Xaxis as our only options. I have digressed here a little, but it makes one wonder: what does an individual Aedra's realm look like? We can visit Moonshadow or hunting grounds relatively easily, but no mortal knows the nature of Aedra's realm. Speaking of the realms, or as Dwemer call them, the 8 worlds of existence, I can find no reason why Dibella or Zenithar would not have their own realms, when they are clearly recognized in orreries. Of course, Trinimac is no more, as his realm is Ashbit. Magnus has no planet or portal to his own realm, as according to Azura, he was too cowardly to rule the realm. As for Jeffre, he most likely is so deeply connected to Nirn, which he loves more than other Aedra, that he resides in all the flora and fauna. Vivek also claims that the Dwemer were not capable of feeling love, explaining why Dibella is not listed among the 8 worlds. One subject I really wish to touch upon is the personality of the Aedra, or the gods in general. Before their creation, they simply were, existed without purpose. They had their spheres of influence, true, but at Etada they were the most pure form of their beings. Now, with so many different religions, their reign has expanded into other matters, their focus becoming broader. Just like Stendar to the Mer is the god of mercy and compassion, but also of wrath reigning on the Daedra and the undead. But to the Nords, he is a god of justice, fraternity and ransom. To Imperials, he is god of mercy, charity and justice. To the Khajiit, he is also the god of mercy. Stun, Stendar, Srendar, no matter what name is uttered, it refers to the same entity, and regardless of your faith, he is a god of what he is. Gods could be compared to a finely cut and polished gem. Around it stand all the races gazing at it. They all see different facets of the gem. In it, light reflects differently, and in the mirror of its surface, each religion sees its own reflection of its own culture. But ultimately, they all look at the same god. With this in mind, perhaps we could define the gods more precisely. For instance, Kain, Knathi, Kinnereth. Under all these names is one singular entity. One race attributes her with sky, other with wind, other with both. But I would argue that this Etada is a goddess of space. She is even described as one creating space for Lorkhan's plan, for Mundus in the void. Similar thinking could be applied to the Daedra. Mephala would be the goddess of obtaining. The murder, lies and sex are only tools she favors. Boethia would have the sphere of overcoming. Azura, change, the dusk and dawn and twilight are the representations of her domain. Of course, the prophecy part of her also fits the change theme, as prophecies precede world-changing events. The few mentioned before are quite subtle in both their action and their words. Some Daedric princes are more obvious in their spheres, such as Molag Bal and his domain of domination. But there is another approach to the Great Spirits. Have you ever wondered why there is twice as many Daedra as there is Aedra? Not counting Talos and Jiggelag, of course. Perhaps there is some meaning behind the 2-to-1 ratio, especially when you view the spirits as concepts and limitations. For example, Akatosh is the concept of time. Azura and Periite could be his limitations. Azura embodies the change of passage of time brings, and Periite is the end that awaits all things, and with strange eons even death may die. Zenithar is the concept of honesty and diligence, while the Nocturnal is the limit or the lack of honesty, as she encourages thievery. Similarly, Clavicus represents the bargains, cheating instead of hard work. This line of thinking also works with the elven deities. Jeffre is the wild, flora and fauna, but he is limited by Hesine, who hunts the creatures, and by Merun's Dagon, who represents the rage of elements one may experience when nature turns on us. Or with Mara's concept of marriage, something pure and good is limited by Mephala, who uses the bonds of matrimony to get her way, wealth, status, power. Of course, the dynamic between Etada is very varied, fluid and not confined to the limit of only one concept. Then, of course, we need to discuss the duality of a god. We have witnessed throughout history a deity act against its own nature. It is not unusual to have god of lies lied to or a god of thievery robbed. I guess the one we need to focus on for the sake of this conversation is Akatosh. See, he was not worshipped before the Alessian rebellion. As a deity, he did not exist. Many people draw parallels between him and Auriel, but in reality Akatosh is a product of Auriel and Shor, or Lorcan, merged into a single deity. But let's start at the beginning. So Auriel is the chief deity of Aldmer and Protomer before them. In the Dawn era, when tensions turned to war between Old and Wandering Elnathe, Auriel led armies of the Old, or Elves, against the Wanderers. On the side of the latter, Lorcan was the leader. I suppose other divines did not participate in the conflict, as they were worshipped by both sides, such as Mara or Stendar, except Trinmac, I suppose, for he was Auriel's champion after all. So, from the Elven perspective, Auriel is the great defender, the bright lord, represented as a dragon or as an eagle. But from the men's point of view, he is the destroyer, the annihilator, and he is remembered as a dragon. The early men called him Alduin, the twilight god. So now the crystal of the time god is cut, gaining two facets, one of Auriel and one of Alduin. There is also Alkan acknowledged by the Khajiit, but that comes later in timeline, so let's ignore this figure for now. Either way, the time god is on both accounts anti-men and quite against the world in general. Auriel regrets participating in the world building of Mundus, and Alduin actively wants to destroy it. Now, all dragons consider themselves children of Akatosh, even Alduin. What he understands through this is vague, but he acknowledges himself as part of something greater. This is why last Dragonborn couldn't devour Alduin's soul. It returned to its source, Akatosh. Alduin is the destroyer who brings about the end times. He announces the end of a Kalpa, with fire and war turns the wheel of Mundus to its starting point, convention. So on one hand we have Auriel, who despises the world and wishes to escape it, but knows he cannot, and Alduin, who tries to destroy it. On the other hand, you have Akatosh, who sends the last Dragonborn to stop Alduin. But to stop him from what? He has abandoned his role of a world eater and instead wants to rule it. So did the last Dragonborn prevent or delay the apocalypse? Here we see that Alduin as an entity has a lot of autonomy from the other part of the Overspirit, Akatosh, Auriel, no matter the name. Perhaps Alduin needed to be killed so that he might be reborn from ashes and reminded of his duty to burn the world so that it, just like Alduin, may rise from its own ashes. But here we can see that Auriel, the god of time, sometimes works against himself. Lastly, I would like to discuss Etada in respect to Kalpas and Orbic time. I think we can agree on the fact that there are several different timelines. First, there is a chain of events regarding Anu and Padme, so certain timeline applies. Then we have the Etada's timeline, which begins with Auriel. His existence allows events to unfold, occurrences to transpire. And lastly, we have the mortal time, time of Mundus, measured in days, months and years. Anu and Padme were pulled outside of time, and so are no longer subject to it. On the other hand, Etada experienced their own passage of time, independent but related to our own. They observe, witness and record the events unknown, but we cannot comprehend their concept of time. Dawn era segment of time between Kalpas signifies both the end and the beginning, end of the world, finding its demise in fire and smoke of war, and the birth of a new one forged in flames and blood. The cyclical nature of Mundus does not apply to the great spirits. The races that emerge after Dawn era may vary, as can their culture, society, religion, and so the deities they worship. The gods that exist are the same, irrelevant of the perception and philosophy of society doing the worshipping. Now let me remind you of the Oblivion Crisis. At the climax of this cataclysm, Meryn's Dagon was stopped by Akatosh, or Auriel himself. But we have established that the Aedra, with the exception of Jeffra and perhaps Tendar, despised the mortal realm. In that case, why would they save it from the Dagon's fire? Because Auriel knows he will not win the next war of manifest metaphors. The one to tip the scales in favor of the elves was Trinmac, and he is no more. In the next Dawn era, Shore's armies of men would win the war, and Aedra's only solution to it is delayed as much as they can, hoping the Mer, longing for the divinity they have lost, will manage to free them all by undoing the world.